The Washington Commanders have made a living lately off of Jayden Daniels being the team's leading rusher, but most of us agree it isn't sustainable long-term. However, it might be sustainable this weekend. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. I appreciate you coming through today. Everydayers, I appreciate you coming through for yet another day of the Locked On Commanders podcast, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, which is a mailbag episode. And listen, it's supposed to be our lessons learned. Let's be honest. Nobody really wants to harp too long on that Dallas Cowboys game. We want to look forward to the playoffs. So I reached out to the insiders and I said, listen, let's do a playoff mailbag. Ask me your playoff questions. Ask me your postseason related questions, and let's do a mailbag episode. So that's what we're going to do here. Talking about Kliff Kingsbury's future as he continues to audition for potential head coaching jobs this weekend, talking about the importance of Marshon Lattimore against Tampa Bay Buccaneers and ground game concerns potentially for the Washington Commanders offense. And we're going to do that thanks to FanDuel, where new customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. The Washington Commanders have been able to survive with Jayden Daniels being the team's leading rusher, but most of us have agreed that it is not sustainable long-term for the Washington Commanders if they're going to continue having success. However, it may be sustainable for at least one more weekend, and that's how we're going to kick off this postseason mailbag episode. Insider Daniel coming through saying the Bucs are susceptible to the quarterback run, which is definitely the advantage in the game. We saw how effective it was in the first game. Do you think it's possible for us to win without help from running backs like these recent weeks, especially since the Bucs interior could cause problems in the run game? And here's the bottom line is, yes, I think that the Washington Commanders could still have success, could still upset the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa, Florida, in the wild card round of the NFL playoffs, even if Jayden Daniels has to be the superhero on this team. And listen, Jayden Daniels is not leading the team in carries. He's at 148 carries compared to Brian Robinson Jr.'s 187, who is number one on the team. But Jayden is the rusher who leads the team with 891 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, 55 first downs run for. And I think even more importantly, Jayden Daniels' success rate of 62.8% is the highest on the team. And again, just shows how important his running ability has been. Success rates, again, it's been a little while since we've talked about this. On first down, you want to gain 60% of the yards to gain. Or 40% of the yards to gain. On second down, 60% of the yards to gain. On third down, all of the yards to gain. So that is what is considered a successful play. So Jayden Daniels successful on his runs 62.8% of the time. And of course, we know a lot of those runs have come on fourth downs that have been successful and have set up touchdowns, late scoring drives, all these things to pull out these late game heroics. And look, obviously the Washington Commanders want to reestablish that run game. They want to get Brian Robinson Jr. going again, or Austin Eckler if they can get him going, or Jeremy McNichols if they want to get him going, or Chris Rodriguez Jr. We'll talk about more about him a little bit more here in just a moment. But overall, if you're asking me, can the Washington Commanders rely on Jayden Daniels to lead the ground game and still come away with the win in this wild card round? I'm going to tell you yes, because we've seen the team do it. And this isn't about the long term. This is about the short term, this weekend specifically. And to Daniel's point, in that week one game, 37-20 loss, certainly, multi-score loss and all those things. But it was Jayden Daniels who had 16 carries for 88 yards, 5.5 yards per average, 2 touchdowns, showed a lot of resiliency. But it's not just the fact that Jayden has the running ability. It's the fact that Jayden Daniels is much more dangerous as a decision maker right now than he was in week one, right? We go back to that week one game, and I mean, Jayden was barely trying to let anything develop before. He was just trying to take off and run for his life. Kliff Kingsbury talked to us after that game leading into week two and basically said, look, he's a rookie quarterback. He's kind of going out there in fight or flight mode. And a lot of times when you have that type of athleticism, the answer is fly. The answer is get out of the pocket and just run. But what was really great was that Jayden Daniels was able to do it. You got Todd Bowles, a Super Bowl winning head coach, or not Super Bowl winning head coach, but a head coach who has won a Super Bowl as a defensive coordinator, who has seen the likes of Lamar Jackson. He's seen the Jalen Hurtses of the world. He's seen the Patrick Mahomes of the world. In fact, he shut down Patrick Mahomes essentially in their Super Bowl win when he was the Buccaneers defensive coordinator before becoming their head coach. So he's seen mobile quarterbacks that can do damage with their legs. And for all the things that they did against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that led to a win, they were not able to keep Jayden Daniels from having a major impact on the offense production side of things with his legs. Today's version of Jayden Daniels, a little bit different, a little bit smarter, a little bit more experienced, a little bit more judicious on when he uses his legs. But I think without a doubt, you're going to have the Washington Commanders come out and say, look, if we can't get Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez Jr. going in this game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers front, because to Daniel's point, Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey alone on that defensive line, very, very formidable unit there for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive front. If they can't get those guys going, they're going to have to turn to Jayden Daniels like we've seen them do. My hope is we're going to maybe see that a little bit from Jayden Daniels earlier in the game. Now, again, the trade-off of that is if you see it earlier in the game, perhaps he wears down later in the game. And obviously, you don't want to see that. We all saw how wore down Jayden Daniels was against the Atlanta Falcons. You can't do that. Again, we get back to the how sustainable is this. You can't do that week in, week out. Go from that Falcons game to this Cowboys game. Why was Jayden Daniels shut down at halftime? Because Dan Quinn was worried about his legs. A little bit of soreness in there after all that running that he was doing against the Atlanta Falcons. So if you do it against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, can you do it in round two? Hopefully that's a question we'll get an opportunity to talk about in round two of the NFL playoffs. But if you're asking me for round one, Dan Quinn did exactly the right thing in the last game of the regular season, resting his young quarterback because they may need him to do what he did in week one here now in week 19, first week of the postseason against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Great question from Daniel to get us started on this mailbag episode. Fran came through, and this is where we're going to talk about C-Rod. Why isn't the team using Chris Rodriguez Jr. more frequently when he has demonstrated over and over again his value? Something is going on with Brian Robinson, and we need to make sure we have a running game that punishes defenses. And Chris Rodriguez, to me, appears to be that guy right now. End quote. And I love the way Fran shaped this question at the end, or asked the question, then shaped his own opinion there at the end, because the point of this conversation is right now. I'm telling you right now, Brian Robinson Jr. in a vacuum, holistically, everything even, is the better running back. Chris Rodriguez Jr., and we've got very little sample sizes to work with to make this assertion, but given the sample sizes that we have right now, my solution, or my hypothesis, my hypothesis is that Chris Rodriguez is the more effective running back on this roster right now compared to Brian Robinson Jr. To that end, why isn't he being used? I'm going to say a little bit, potentially, a little bit of coaching bravado. Austin Eckler comes from the Chargers, played for Anthony Lynn. Anthony Lynn is this team's run game coordinator. Jeremy McNichols is an Anthony Lynn guy. Potentially, this is Anthony Lynn kind of showing, look, these are the guys that I know, I trust. I've gone to battle with them over and over again. Chris Rodriguez Jr., this is our first season together. You were a practice squad guy. Haven't seen you a lot. Even though you've done well in game action, he's got a lot more experience with Eckler and McNichols in game action over the years than he does with Chris Rodriguez. Is it the right answer? Truthfully, no, I don't think it is. I think Chris Rodriguez has deserved an opportunity to get more playing time. I was very disappointed, even though the team got the win. I was very disappointed that Chris Rodriguez didn't get out there to get a carry against the Dallas Cowboys. I felt like with the way the run game was going, with the way the game flow is going, go out there, let Chris Rodriguez on the field again, and let him show you. It starts to feel a little bit, not that I think this is what's happening to this extent. I want to be clear here, but it does start to feel a little bit like we're going to not give him opportunities so that we can continue to give our guys a little bit of shine. Now, to that end, Jeremy McNichols not exactly getting a lot of burn against the Dallas Cowboys either. So again, I'm not accusing Anthony Lynn or Kliff Kingsbury or anybody else of trying to hide Chris Rodriguez or intentionally holding him back. I want to be very clear on this, but I do think there's a little bit of bias showing in the fact that coaches have worked with other running backs on this team more, and Chris Rodriguez perhaps is not getting the opportunities that I think he should get because of that. To that end, David came through. Do you think that Brian Robinson is going to be 100% for Sunday? No, I don't think Brian Robinson Jr. is going to be 100% for the entirety of this rest of the season. I don't think Brian Robinson has been 100%. This is probably about week 6 or 7. You know what I mean? Like, you go back to that injury he suffered that caused him the Baltimore Ravens game. He's had 3 injuries that we know of to the right leg, that alone. And he's a running back, man. Like, you need those appendages. I don't think Brian Robinson Jr. is 100%. That's not the only thing I think is causing this dip in production. But certainly I think Brian Robinson Jr. is one of those players you look at and say he's not going to be 100% until probably summer. You know what I mean? So no, I don't think Brian Robinson is going to be 100% for Sunday. Certainly that lends credibility to, hey, let's get other running backs involved. But look, let's get not just Austin Eckler involved. Let's get Jeremy McNichols some touches. Let's get Chris Rodriguez some touches. Let's get Ben Sinnott in the backfield a little bit. Let's mix some of the things up. But listen, playoff football can unveil a lot of those things. So potentially we may see some of those things come to fruition this weekend in the wild card round. Speaking of players we want to see in the wild card round, cornerback Marshon Lattimore could be making his third game appearance for this team in the wild card round of the playoffs, and it would be a doozy. We're going to talk about that next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that today thanks in part to our friends over at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers, you can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, whether that first bet wins or loses. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, opening the wild card round at home against the Washington Commanders, are 3-point favorites to beat those Washington Commanders. The over-under total points scored on that line is sitting at 50.5 points. So whatever you think is going to happen this weekend in whatever game you're looking forward to, put your opinions to work by visiting FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins or if your first $5 bet loses. That's FanDuel.com, where you can go to make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. If you didn't know, Marshon Lattimore and Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Mike Evans have had quite the rivalry brewing over the years, as both of them were members of the NFC South. Now that Marshon is in the NFC East, we may get to see that rivalry rekindled this weekend. And if you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, make sure you sign up to be a Locked On Commanders insider today at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. From there, you can text me your comments, your questions, and I'm going to send you live information from practices, press conferences, games, all of the like. You're going to get bonus content, and you're going to get invitations to insider exclusive only Zoom Zoom conferences, where we get together and talk a little bit of ball. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to try it out for free for the first 2 weeks. Robbie asks, what are the chances of Marshon Lattimore being able to play Sunday night? Now, I wish I could give you a firm number, 70, 30, 80, 20, but I'm going to tell you right now, here's the best way I can tell you. I think Marshon Lattimore is going to be available Sunday night. Here's why I think it. Take it for what it's worth. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional, and I have not seen Marshon Lattimore in a little while as far as like on the practice field. Seen him in the locker room here and there. But when Marshon Lattimore aggravated his hamstring injury against the Philadelphia Eagles, this is what really stands out to me. They were working like the Dickens to get him back on that field. I mean, they had the Theragun going. They were putting him in the blue tent a couple of times. They were putting heat on him. They were rubbing that thing as much as they could. This wasn't a situation where they're like, man, we're just desperate to get him out there, and man, we just have to have him for this game, or, you know, the end of the world is going to happen. This is a situation to me where it said, look, the player's got a hamstring issue. He's had a hamstring issue, but this hamstring issue is not so severe that there's not a possibility he can return to this game with a little bit of therapy, with a little bit of in-game treatment. So that's what they were trying to do. So if they had this inkling at all that in-game they could get him back. Again, remember, this is the same coaching staff, and I know it's a different circumstance, different context, but they just sat Jayden Daniels down for the entire half of football because of soreness that is not going to impact him in the wild card round. Now, again, more on the line at the time, you know, against Philadelphia Eagles. But if you trade for Marshon Lattimore, he aggravates a hamstring injury, and he actually aggravates it to the point where he should miss multiple weeks of time. You're not trying to get him back on the field in that game. You know what I mean? That's just kind of the way I look at this staff. So the fact that they were working on him, trying to get him back in that game, tells me that it's not a serious aggravation, and that gives me confidence to say that, yes, I do believe Marshon Lattimore will play this weekend. Now, I'm not telling you can take that to the bank. I'm not telling you go run and tell your friends Marshon's playing this weekend. I'm just giving you the reasons why I have confidence that he'll play this weekend, and I like to believe that those reasons are tied to at least reality, if not actual fact. We will, of course, hear from Dan Quinn on Wednesday afternoon, and I promise you that Marshon will be one of those players asked about. Marshon will be somebody that we're all looking at. And you want to see it because there's a lot of history between Mike Evans and Marshon Lattimore. Insider Michael came through. There's a lot of history about that matchup that he was talking about. Do we see this matchup? How do you think this will play out and the impact on other aspects of the Buccaneers offense. So again, Michael, I do think that we're going to see this matchup. Mike Evans and Marshon Lattimore, if you don't know about the history of these two players and how much they just genuinely hate each other, this is not a love-hate relationship. This is not a brotherhood of football, intense competitors relationship. No, these two dudes do not like each other. And when they get on the football field, they are not afraid to let it show. And I'll tell you right now, these officials are probably going to be aware of it. You might see an early flag or two. Hopefully they play it even, and hopefully maybe some offsetting penalties. I don't know, man. If you're going to send a message, fine, but please do not set one of these two teams behind the eight ball trying to send a stinking message. At least send the message equally to both sides. But these two guys go at it, man. And the way that it impacts the rest of the Bucs offense is if you put Marshon Lattimore on Mike Evans, you have some faith that you don't have to put anybody else on Mike Evans. And that is saying something, because Mike Evans just completed a 1,000-yard regular season for the 11th straight season in his career. 11 of 11 times Mike Evans has stepped on the field as an NFL player for a season. He has caught at least 1,000 yards through the air. And that ties Jerry Rice for the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons in NFL history by any receiver. So Mike Evans certainly is a Hall of Famer walking onto that field just like Bobby Wagner is. And to say that you're going to leave Mike Evans one-on-one with one dude, that's bold. And I'm telling you, Mike Evans has gotten the better of Marshon Lattimore from time to time, but Marshon Lattimore has also gotten the better. And I don't know that I would say Joe Witt's going to do it every single time. You're still going to give him some top coverage. But it offers you the opportunity, if you're Joe Witt Jr., to be more aggressive in other places, maybe clog the middle a little bit to try to keep Jalen McMillan from getting going, to add another person who might be, kind of spying a guy like Bucky Irving to keep him, the Buccaneers rookie running back, to keep him from going wild. Or maybe you want to chase down Baker Mayfield, who's not a super mobile quarterback, but he will move the pocket and he will move out of the pocket. Things like that. It gives you the opportunities to maybe have a freelancer out there and really try to cause some havoc against the Buccaneers offense. That's how valuable it can be. In fact, I'll just tell you right now, if Marshon Lattimore does not play in this game, I am not super confident the Washington Commanders are going to win this game. If Marshon Lattimore does play this game, then I think that they have a very good chance of winning this game. There are other players involved in that on both sides of this matchup before I make my official prediction at the end of the week. But Marshon Lattimore is an incredibly important part of this game, not just because of the Mike Evans-Marshon Lattimore rivalry, but just because of the way he impacts the rest of the defense. Fran came through again. Pick your poison. Benjamin St-Juste or Michael Davis, who you got? Look, if Marshon Lattimore can't go, one of these two guys is going to start. Personally, I'm probably going to go Michael Davis. And it's not even that I think Michael Davis is actually all that better than Benjamin St-Juste, but kind of seen this song and dance from Benjamin St-Juste before. He kind of makes the same mistakes over and over again. And at least with Michael Davis, there might be a little bit of a chance that they don't just go out there and target number 24 the way that I think they're going to target number 25 if St-Juste is out there. And then Michael came through. Terry McLaurin had 2 catches for 17 yards last time they played the Bucs. How do we get the ball to Terry McLaurin next week? Well, basically do the same thing that Luke McCaffrey. I don't know why Luke McCaffrey would be calling plays for an offense, but you do the same thing that Kliff Kingsbury has been doing really since we all started kind of calling him out in press conferences saying, hey, coach, like, what's up with Terry McLaurin lining up in the same place? What's up with Terry McLaurin not really being used creatively? What's up with routes combinations not working to get him open? And, Kliff Kingsbury probably already had these things in his back pocket, was just waiting for the right time to do it. And it just happened to coincide with when we started asking him a little bit more about it. But whatever it was, Kliff Kingsbury has been getting McLaurin open more involved more, and it's been doing a lot of good for the Washington Commanders. And so you just got to keep doing what you've been doing. Look, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have some decent secondary players, but Jamel Dean, one of their cornerbacks, has been incredibly banged up. Zion McCollum has been a very good cornerback, but he's still fairly young and experienced. You can play some games with him, try to get him off his game. Antoine Winfield Jr. Could play this game, may not play this game. Even if he plays this game, he's not going to be 100%. So you try to stress those injuries, stress that physical limitation a little bit. Jordan Whitehead is not going to play in this game after causing a car accident, it turns out, last weekend before the Saints game. So, the Buccaneers secondary is going to be incredibly banged up. So that's going to help a little bit too. But also, we go back to Jayden Daniels, right? Jayden Daniels, they didn't get Terry McLaurin involved in week 1, maybe a little bit because of the scheme. Sure. Maybe a little bit because of the Buccaneers defense. Sure. But also because Jayden Daniels simply was a rookie quarterback and he's going to have a lot more. He's got a lot more experience this year, but he's going to have a lot more confidence in the base that he's playing from in this game. So I expect Terry McLaurin to certainly have a much better game in this one than he did in the last one. If he does, And if Jayden does, then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may be staying home. The Washington Commanders may be advancing to the divisional round. If that happens, the heat around Kliff Kingsbury becoming a head coach may pick up even more. How likely Kliff Kingsbury is to get a head coaching offer this offseason, I'm going to tell you that, and I'm going to tell you which job is the best and the worst for him, in my opinion, coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that thanks to our friends over at Prize Picks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that is where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and you get a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. And the best part is you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, or you can take all the time you want in the world if you're someone who likes to go super deep into the analytics. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members, including myself, and billions in winnings, a little bit including myself, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Here is a special offer for Locked On NFL Network listeners. Download the app today. Use the code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. With Prize Picks, run your game. Wrapping up this mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, postseason mailbag episode. A lot of great questions submitted by insiders. I've already told them, but listen, guys, if you don't hear your question on this episode, it's not because I didn't get to it, or not because I got rid of it. It's because I couldn't get to it. So I've got it stashed for potential future episodes. And I kind of went through with the ones that say, okay, which ones are most likely to be usable next week or the week after compared to this week. So Mark came through. Insider Mark asked, what's the likelihood that Kliff Kingsbury gets a head coaching job? I think I'm going to answer this two ways. What's the likelihood that Kliff Kingsbury gets offered a head coaching job? I think very good. What's the likelihood that Kliff takes a head coaching job? I'm a little less sure about that one. I kind of think Kliff Kingsbury, if you look for the man he's working for, Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn is a second-time head coach, and then look at the situation he walked into. GM that he's lockstepped with, tons of assets, draft-wise, tons of assets, money-wise, and a roster that was just waiting to be flipped over. That's what the Washington Commanders did this year. And I think that's the situation that Kliff Kingsbury needs to be smart and wait for if it doesn't present itself this offseason. And I don't think it's going to present itself this offseason. But there are a number of jobs. And at the time of this recording, the New Orleans Saints, the New York Jets, the New England Patriots, Jacksonville Jaguars, Chicago Bears are all looking for new coaches. So I'm going to tell you which jobs I think are worst to the best. And I'm going to do it in that order. And we're going to start with that exact list. New Orleans Saints are the worst job for Kliff Kingsbury, in my opinion. Upside, they've got a very passionate fan base, historically patient franchise that doesn't rush to fire people. But, man, the NFC South is not exactly a beast of a division. Right now, the downside is Carolina Panthers are getting better. The Atlanta Falcons have a young quarterback they believe in. The Buccaneers are better than advertised when healthy. They're very banged up this year. I think that's been a significant part of this. I think if they don't have some of the injuries they have, they probably locked up the NFC South a couple of weeks ago. Cap space is last in the league with the Saints, and GM Mickey Loomis is still making the roster decisions, which is part of that historically patient franchise. So you're likely stuck with Derek Carr, who simply does not fit the Kliff Kingsbury style of play. So I think the Saints is the worst job for Kliff Kingsbury. The second worst, New York Jets. The upside there, good young talent outside of Aaron Rodgers, full shelf of draft picks, and the first pick is number 7. They've got 3 in the top 100. However, the downside is not as much cap room as some of these other teams. They're facing dead cap situations with Aaron Rodgers, hopefully, and potentially Devontae Adams, who may say, hey, look, I only came here for Aaron, so if he's gone, I'm gone. Players who don't trust the organizational decision-making because they've been screwed over, for lack of a better term. Even if you get rid of Rodgers, who you bring in has to be better suited for the Kingsbury model than Aaron Rodgers or anybody else. And there's just not a lot of options out there right now that I see on the horizon. So I have the Jets as the next worst job. The next one after that, New England Patriots. Sure, they've got a young quarterback in Drake May. They've got plenty of cap space, but the majority of their roster is still in rough shape. Which could be an upside if Robert Kraft is willing to let you get rid of a lot of that roster. And then he and Eli Wolf, the GM, have to have the same vision. I don't know if that would happen or not. And then I have some questions if Drake May can really operate Kliff Kingsbury's scheme as well. Jacksonville Jaguars are going to come in as the second best job opportunity for Kliff Kingsbury potentially. The upside there, you have some good young talent. Wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. can take the lid off of defenses They're in the worst division in football, so the opportunity to move up quickly is there. Trevor Lawrence, certainly a better fit for Kliff Kingsbury's offense than the other quarterbacks that are currently tied to these other job openings. I believe the downside, everything else. GM Trent Baalke is still there, lower cap room than some of the other jobs, and you're committed, you're tied to Trevor Lawrence, whether you like it or not. Chicago Bears. It's the best job available for Kliff Kingsbury. The upside, cap space. They've got a good amount of cap space. They got a young quarterback on a rookie deal in Caleb Williams, who Kliff knows very, very well. So Kliff doesn't want the job with Caleb Williams tied to it. It's because he knows him and he's making an informed decision. Weapons like DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet. He knows Caleb again. 4 picks in the top 80 this year's NFL draft. The downside, it's a big one. GM Ryan Poles, man. I don't trust GM Ryan Poles, and I don't care if Kliff Kingsbury answers to him, the owner, or to Santa Claus himself. If GM Ryan Poles is building that roster, I feel like you're going to have holes, and it doesn't matter. Bears didn't offer Kliff Kingsbury an offensive coordinator job last season after interviewing him, supposedly because they were concerned in the long-term future. Kliff comes in, falls out with Caleb, ends up getting pulled out to be a head coach somewhere else. Well, the problem is you're concerned about the success you might have, and you made a decision that led to a large lack of success. That's the decision-making we're talking about from GM Ryan Poles. Talking about worrying about being too good too fast. Like, that's what you're worried about in Chicago. It's not what you should be worried about, Ryan. Yeah. So personally, I don't think any of these jobs are good situations. And look, don't tell me that, well, Kliff Kingsbury knows Caleb. That's the perfect situation. He also knew Kyler Murray. That didn't go so well. So hopefully, to me, Kliff Kingsbury waits until there's an opportunity where he and a GM can be in lockstep. There's a quarterback situation that he can control and a roster that has the flexibility, just like Washington's did, or at least close to what Washington did, with the assets, the expiring contracts, the removable contracts, to really reshape the team into the eyes or into the spirit of what they're trying to do. So I want to see Kliff Kingsbury come back. I really think that he's probably going to. That's the best way I can answer that question right now without predicting or without getting into the mind of Kliff Kingsbury. Great mailbag questions, everybody. I really greatly appreciate it. Our next episode, we are going to be live. The plan is 8 p.m. Eastern time live. Locked On Bucks, Locked On Commanders, crossover. James Jarko and I are going to get together like old times and have a good old football conversation. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler Rowland is going to kick you off in the morning with some NFL espresso. Tony Wiggins is going to bring you in for some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day. Every dayers, thanks for coming through like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.